Dengan izin Yang Amat Arif, prosiding rujukan Mahkamah Persekutuan Malaysia nombor 1 tahun 2022, Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas.
Saya memulakan prosiding dengan menjemput Yang Berusaha Puan Karen Chia Yilin, Yang di-Pertua Majlis Peguam Malaysia untuk memberikan ucapan penghormatan.
Terima kasih Yang Amat Arif. Yang Amat Arif, Tun Tengku Maimun binti Tuan Mat, Ketua Hakim Negara. Yang amat berbahagia Tun Raus Sharif, mantan Ketua Hakim Negara, merangkap Ahli Suruhanjaya Pelantikan Kehakiman. Yang amat Arif Tan Sri Rohana binti Yusof, Presiden Mahkamah Rayuan. Yang amat Arif Tan Sri Datuk Sri Azhar bin Muhammad, Hakim Besar Melaya. Yang amat Arif Tan Sri Datuk Abang Iskandar bin Abang Hashim, Hakim Besar Sabah dan Sarawak. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Idrus Harun, Peguam Negara Malaysia. Yang berhormat Datuk Wira Mas Ermiati binti Samsudin, Timbalan Menteri di Jabatan Perdana Menteri Bahagian Parlimen dan Undang-Undang. Yang Arif, Hakim Mahkamah Persekutuan dan Hakim Mahkamah Rayuan. Yang berusaha Puan Hasbi binti Hassan, Ketua Pendaftar Mahkamah Persekutuan Malaysia. Wakil Majlis Peguam Malaysia dan pengurusi serta wakil peguam dari Persatuan Peguam Negeri Selangor. Ahli-ahli keluarga Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas, Dev kehormat, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dihormati sekalian. Saya, Karen Chia Yilin, mewakili Badan Peguam Malaysia dan Majlis Peguam Malaysia. Yang amat Arif, saya memohon untuk meneruskan ucapan saya dalam bahasa Inggeris. Much obliged, my lady. My lady, the distinction of the reference proceeding this morning is a testament to the high standing and regard to which Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas is held as a judge and as the 6th Lord President of the Federal Court from 2nd of March 1984 till 11th of August 1988. The last occasion on which we congregated for a reference proceeding with respect to a former Lord President of the Federal Court was one in honor of Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhyiddin Shah, the 5th Lord President, held at the Federal Court on the 19th of November 2014. May I begin by extending my gratitude for having the honor and privilege to pay tribute and commit to posterity the salutary achievements of the late former Lord President Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas. Reference proceedings are a unique and momentous and meaningful occasion. The three branches of the legal community, that is to say, those concerned with upholding the rule of law in the administration of justice, namely the judiciary, the Attorney General's chambers, and the bar, gather to collectively recognize and honor a departed member of our community. My ladies and my lords, whilst it is unavoidable within the Malaysian historical context that any reference to the late Tun Salleh Abbas is inseverable from the dark days of the 1988 judicial crisis, very often the late Tun Salleh Abbas's name is synonymous with respect, admiration, and hope, due to his integrity and the idealistic principles he held dearly and lived by. His integrity, intellect, and stature had a profound impact on our nation. When I ponder upon the accomplishments of the late Lord President, I am reminded of the Latin phrase, sic parvis magna, which translates to, from small beginnings come great things. Son to a sailor and small village trader, the late Tun Salleh Abbas was born in Kampung Raja Besut in the state of Terengganu on 25th August 1929. He graduated from the University of Wales in July 1954 with a Bachelor of Law degree, read law in Middle Temple, and was called to the English bar in 1955. The late Tun Salleh Abbas also held a master's in international law and constitution from the University of London. In 1955, the same year he was called to the bar, the late Tun Salleh began his illustrious career in public service as a deputy public prosecutor in his home state. In the following years, he was appointed as a magistrate before leaving to become a senior federal counsel with the Attorney General's chambers, and later became the legal advisor to the states of Negeri Sembilan and Melaka. For a decade, he was the Solicitor General before rising to the rank of a federal court judge. The late Tun Salleh was the Chief Judge of Malaya in 1982 when Almarhum Sultan Azlan Shah was appointed as the then Lord President. And 2 years later, in 1984, the late Tun Salleh took over the post of Lord President. It is significant to note that during his tenure as Lord President, the constitutional amendment under Act A566 was made on 1st January 1985 to repeal Article 131 of the Federal Constitution. This amendment effectively abolished appeals to the Privy Council. By his own account, the late Tun Salleh had lightheartedly expressed in a 2002 interview with Malaysia Kini that, in retrospect, he had made an indirect contribution to his own dismissal when he made changes to the judiciary a few years earlier by severing the link between the Malaysian judiciary and the London-based Privy Council. In the interview, the late Tun Salleh was quoted as saying, quote and unquote, "After my dismissal, I went to London to give some lectures and met a friend who is one of the judges at the House of Lords who told me that my biggest mistake was severing the Privy Council from the Malaysian judiciary. He said, if the council was still the supreme appellate body, I could have been safe. I think he is right," unquote. My lady, permit me to thread the calm before the storm. During the years leading up to the 1988 judicial crisis, the Malaysian judiciary had garnered a reputation of independence and impartiality. It was well respected locally as well as internationally, so much so that the then Prime Minister of Malaysia, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, in his speech during the opening ceremony of the ASEAN Law Association General Assembly on 26 October 1982 stated, and I quote, "I will always respect the judiciary. We do not expect the courts to be pro or anti-government, only pro the Constitution and pro the law. We shall always respect their judgments," unquote. My lady, signs of the series of devastating events that will unfold could be first traced back to 1986, when the Supreme Court decided in the Berthelsen case that the then Immigration Director General was wrong to revoke the work permit of an Asian Wall Street Journal correspondent because he was not given a chance to explain himself when the decision was made. Subsequently, comments were made against the judiciary in the 1986 issue of the Time magazine, where the judiciary was accused of failing to interpret the law pursuant to intentions of Parliament. Contempt proceedings were then initiated in the High Court by the then leader of the opposition in defense of the judiciary. The matter was dismissed upon appeal to the Supreme Court, and the late Tun Salleh Abbas, who heard the appeal, dismissed it, stating astutely that, quote and unquote, there is no call to be overly hypersensitive and to overact impetuously. Unfortunately, derogatory remarks continued to be made by certain members of the executive against the judiciary, especially as recorded in the 1987 Hansard, where amendments to the Printing Presses and Publications Act and the Police Act were debated in Parliament. The late Tun Salleh Abbas, as Lord President, was patient amidst these open, blatant, and vicious attacks on the judiciary. He went on record on September 1987 to say, rather, quote and unquote, "I do not wish to comment. I think the best thing to do now is to keep quiet and let the matter rest." During this turbulent period, the judiciary upheld the cause of justice without regard to its own interests, uninfluenced by fear or favor. And allow me, my lady, to highlight 3 cases that encapsulate the sagacity of the judiciary. In the Allahyarham case, the court quashed the minister's decision in refusing a permit on grounds that his absolute discretion under the Printing Presses and Publications Act of 1984 had been exercised on irrelevant considerations. In the Raja Khalid case, while releasing a detainee under the Internal Security Act of 1960, the court affirmed that the action of the Crown or its ministers or officials is subject to the supervision of the judges on habeas corpus. Again, in the Kapal Singh case, the court ordered another detainee's release, finding the minister's detention order under the same act to have been made mala fide. My lady, the full citations for all the three cases that I have mentioned are incorporated as footnotes in the written version of the speech. Whilst these cases are testimony to the fearlessness of the judiciary in holding even the government of the day accountable to the rule of law and principles of justice, certain members of the executive construed them to be illustrations where the court had made or applied law which was not actually required by statute, thereby contradicting or even defying statute. These were the heart of the arguments raised against the judiciary in Parliament when amendments to Article 121 of the Federal Constitution were debated in Parliament. The amendment to Article 121 of the Federal Constitution was designed to undermine judicial power from the courts and the basic structure of the Federal Constitution. Through those difficult times, our historical archives indicated that certain members of the executive feared for their political interests as it corresponded with the UMNO crisis arising from the contest for the UMNO presidency in 1987. An internal fight between two blocks of UMNO members resulted in 11 UMNO members challenging the validity of a party election, which then resulted in the High Court declaring UMNO an unlawful society. The plaintiffs appealed to the Supreme Court, and the appeal was fixed to be heard on the 13th of June 1988 by a full bench of 9 Supreme Court judges. What was at stake was the political survival of UMNO as a political party and its future to govern the country. In the months preceding the 1988 judicial crisis, the executive began taking action against dissidents using the Internal Security Act. It was a time of uncertainty and trepidation for Malaysians. Fundamental liberties had come under threat, and the Kapal Singh case mentioned earlier concerning the Internal Security Act of 1960 was to be heard before the Supreme Court. My ladies and my lords, these grim events eventually culminated in 2 letters that appear to be the beginning and at the heart of the 1988 judicial crisis. The late Tun Salleh, assisted by the other 3 judges, wrote a courageous letter dated 26 March of 1988 to the then His Majesty, the King. The contents of the letter expressed their utmost disappointment with accusations hurled against the judiciary by certain members of the executive and voiced out their hope that these unfounded allegations be stopped. It was hope that was at the heart of the late Tun Salleh's letter. Hope, which was later crushed with a second letter dated 5th May 1988 that was sent to the ruler, providing that the late Tun Salleh ought to be removed on grounds of misbehavior and for being unable to perform his functions as Lord President, and the King was required to appoint a tribunal under Article 125 of the Federal Constitution, and that he was advised to suspend Tun Salleh pending the tribunal's report. And the King replied on the same day, agreeing to this course of action. Allahyarham Tun Salleh stood for the high principles of the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary at great cost to himself, both professionally and personally. This was best displayed by the late Tun Salleh's deliberate decision to withdraw his application for early retirement and the comforts that would follow with the offer of positions and added remuneration. Instead, he chose to await the appointment of a tribunal and to face the consequences, come what may. On 13th of June 1988, a tribunal was publicly announced to investigate the late Tun Salleh. The composition of the tribunal, the secrecy of the proceedings, and the constitutionality of the procedures gained criticisms nationally and internationally, and in light of this, the late Tun Salleh turned to the courts. His legal team led by the late Raja Aziz Adrus, filed an application for leave to obtain a writ of prohibition in the Kuala Lumpur High Court to stop the tribunal from proceeding with its work. However, once again, the late Tun Saleh was not afforded proper justice from the High Court and was forced to turn to the Federal Court. Incredibly, adding to this struggle for justice, orders were made for the Federal Court's doors to be locked up. The seal of the Federal Court had been secreted away, and the staff of the Federal Court were given firm instructions not to be available to assist any of the Federal Court judges. Nevertheless, faith in the judiciary was more than justified by the sitting of 5 Federal Court judges, despite the ill-intentioned obstacles put in their way. That day, Tan Sri Wan Sulaiman Pawante, Datuk George Edward Sia Kim Seng, Tan Sri Azmi Kamaruddin, Tan Sri Yusofi Abdul Kadir, and Tan Sri Wan Hamzah Wan Saleh made the order to stop the tribunal from submitting any recommendation to His Majesty, the Yang di-Pertuan Agung. Before the order of the Federal Court was served by Raja Aziz and his legal team on the tribunal at Parliament House, news came that gates to the Parliament House had been locked, with the tribunal members inside. It was Tan Sri Wan Sulaiman Pawante who called the office of the Inspector General of Police and told a senior officer that a federal court order was about to be served upon the persons in Parliament House, and there must be no impediment to the service on pain of contempt of court. The aftermath following the Federal Court's firm defiance against any interference in its own independence that day became an unprecedented blot in our country's judicial history. 2 judges were removed from office and the other 3 were suspended. The tribunal completed its deliberation and Tun Saleh was formally removed from office on 8th of August of 1988. As a result of the injustice done to him by the executive back in 1988, the strength and impartiality of the Malaysian judiciary was viewed with slight misgivings in the subsequent years. My lady, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And in my opinion, the Semenyi Jaya case and a flurry of other federal court decisions in the recent years, recognizing the basic structure doctrine and the recent high-profile court proceedings inspired confidence amongst the legal community, as well as members of the public, that we are now bending towards justice. My ladies and my lords, the late Tun Saleh Habas became a politician in 1999 when he won a state assembly seat in Jerteh, Terengganu, and was appointed as a member of the EXCO under Datuk Abdul Hadi Awang's cabinet. From the Malaysian Bar's archives, the late Tun Saleh was a practicing advocate and solicitor for a period of time, and having last held his practicing certificate in the year of 2020. He was truly a man of renaissance and have had the distinction of serving in the judiciary, the Attorney General's chambers, as well as being a member of the Malaysian Bar. Not many can claim a similar feat. His legacy is in having left an indelible mark and impact on the legal community through his pronounced actions and deeds. I would like to end with words written by our first Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra Al-Haj, on the late Tun Saleh, and I quote and unquote, "A man does not climb that long ladder to the pinnacle of our judicial system without providing himself every inch of the way to be upright and extremely fastidious about his honor. His integrity must have been proven again and again in his judicial actions, his private life, as well as all his work in the public domain. Any man who was any less than that could not have even approached that position which, by its very nature, presupposes character of the greatest probity and rectitude. The very act of appointing such a man means that he is beyond reproach." My lady, I seek leave of this honorable court to express the sincere condolences of the Malaysian Bar to each family member of the late Tun Saleh present today. We too feel the loss, and we feel the loss of a humble yet exceptional Malaysian. May I now respectfully move for the record of this proceeding to be preserved in the archives of this honorable court and a copy of its of it extended to the family of Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas. I'm obliged, my ladies and my lords.
Terima kasih kepada Yang Berusaha Yang di-Pertua Majlis Peguam Malaysia. Saya meneruskan prosiding dengan menjemput Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Idrus bin Harun, Peguam Negara Malaysia, untuk memberikan ucapan penghormatan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Yang Amat Arif Tun Tengku Maimun binti Tuan Mat, Ketua Hakim Negara. Yang amat berbahagia Tun Raul Syarif, mantan Ketua Hakim Negara, merangkap Ahli Suruhanjaya Pelantikan Kehakiman. Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Rohana binti Yusof, Presiden Mahkamah Rayuan. Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Datuk Sri Azhar bin Muhammad, Hakim Besar Melaya. Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Datuk Abang Iskandar bin Abang Hashim, Hakim Besar Sabah dan Sarawak. Yang berhormat Datuk Wira Mas Armiyati binti Samsudin, Timbalan Menteri Jabatan Perdana Menteri, Parlimen dan Undang. Yang Arif Hakim Mahkamah Persekutuan dan Hakim Mahkamah Rayuan. Yang berusaha Puan Hasbi binti Hassan, Ketua Pendaftar Mahkamah Persekutuan Malaysia. Yang berusaha Puan Karen Chia Yilin, yang di-Pertua Badan Peguam Malaysia, yang hadir bersama-sama Wakil Majlis Peguam Malaysia dan pengerusi serta Wakil Peguam dari Persatuan Peguam Negeri Selangor. Ahli-ahli keluarga Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh Abbas, brief kehormat tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dirahmati sekalian. Bagi pihak diri saya dan para pegawai di Jabatan Peguam Negara, izinkan saya terlebih dahulu merakamkan ucapan takziah dan menzahirkan rasa duka cita kami kepada keluarga Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Haji Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas di atas pembergian Allahyarham pada tanggal 16 Januari 2021 yang lalu. Izinkan saya meneruskan ucapan saya dalam bahasa Inggeris. It is indeed a true privilege and honor to be a part of these solemn reference proceedings to recount and honor the memory of Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas, a man that has always been held in the highest esteem and respect by his legal brethren. We are also called upon to provide some reflection on his legacy. When Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas took his place of solace with his Creator on 16 January 2021, we were all swept with sadness and grief by his sudden demise. This loss came at a point where the entire world, including our nation, was forced to deal with the emergence of an unknown deadly virus which created a mortality shock throughout the world. It was during this difficult time that the nation lost one of its brightest sons, revered as most distinguished, admired, and respected jurist that ever walked among the sacred halls of the country's legal fraternity. Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas hailed from humble beginnings. He was born on 25th August 1939 in Kampung Raja, Besut, Terengganu, as a third child from among a family of 7 siblings. His father, Haji Abbas, was a sailor cum village trader, while his mother, Hajah Wantijah, was a homemaker. He began his early education in a Malay medium school of Sekolah Melayu, Kampung Raja, Besut, where he thereon went to an English school in Kuala Terengganu and attended Sultan Sulaiman English School. His religious roots were not forgotten, as parallel to this, Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas also took lessons to learn the Arabic language and Islamic studies at a religious school in his hometown. His scholastic aptitude and brilliance made its first print when he obtained a grade 1 in his senior Cambridge examination in 1948. His eagerness to contribute to the family prompted Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas to immediately join the public service as a clerk before he was later accepted as an administrative officer in Terengganu. He then went on to become the assistant district officer in 1949 and until 1950. It was during this time in public service that Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas was offered a scholarship by the Sultan of Terengganu to further his studies in England. He seized the opportunity and courageously went on this academic journey where he read law at the University of Aberystwyth, Wales. In 1954, Allahyarham Tun Dato completed his Bachelor of Laws degree with honors and later called to the bar at Middle Temple in 1955. Upon completing his studies, Allahyarham Tun Dato then returned to Malaya and commenced his distinguished legal career by joining the Judicial Legal Service. His illustrious career in this service was both outstanding and remarkable, while his promotion was testimony to his legal acumen. He began this chapter of his life as a magistrate in Kota Baru, Kelantan, and thereafter served as a deputy public prosecutor in Kuala Lumpur. Although he was constantly kept busy with his duties, his undying love for legal education subsisted. While with the Attorney General's chambers, he went on to study and obtain his master's degree in international and constitutional law from the University of London in 1960. Upon his return home in 1962, Allahyarham Tun Dato continued to serve in the AGC in various positions, among others as the State Legal Advisor of Negeri Sembilan and Melaka, President of Sessions Court, Legal Advisors in various ministries, Senior Appellate Counsel, and Parliamentary Draftsman. He then went on to become the Solicitor General, then the highest position in the Judicial Legal Service from 1966 to 1979, since the then Minister of Law was the AG. To date, Allahyarham Tun Dato remains the longest serving SG at 14 years. Whilst balancing his heavy responsibilities and undertakings as Solicitor General, Allahyarham Tun Dato made a valuable contribution to constitutional reference when in 1971 he authored the book Prinsip Perlembagaan dan Pemerintahan di Malaysia. Through the publication of this scholarly manuscript, he made his mark as one of the earliest local legal practitioners to do so. While serving as DSG too, Allahyarham Tun Dato was also a notable member of the National Consultative Council, or NCC, which was formed right after the racial riots of 13 May 1969. He was one of the personalities who were directly responsible in the formulation of the Rukun Negara, a document which became the sacred commandment of our nation. This living document is irrefutable proof of Allahyarham Tun Salleh's intellect, passion, and affection for this country. In 1979, Allahyarham Tun Dato was appointed directly to the Federal Court. His elevation was an acknowledgement of his perseverance and astuteness of the law he so assiduously practiced. The isolated appointment or direct elevation to the Federal Court was unprecedented, making it the first of its kind in Malaysian history. He was later appointed as the Chief Justice of Malaya in 1983. Then a year later, on 3rd February 1984, Allahyarham Tun Dato was made the Lord President of the Supreme Court of Malaysia, which he held until his retirement in 1988. Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra Al-Haj, the first Prime Minister of Malaysia, in his foreword for the book May Day of Justice, or May Day for Justice, described Allahyarham Tun Dato's unquestionable character and his remarkable ascent as Lord President in the following words: "A man does not climb that long ladder to the pinnacle of our justice system without proving himself every inch of the way to be upright and extremely fastidious about his honor. His integrity must have been proven again and again in his judicial actions, his private life, and all his work in the public domain. Any man who was any less than that could not have even approached that position, which by its very nature presupposes character of the greatest probity and rectitude. The very act of appointing such a man means that he is beyond reproach." Allahyarham Tun Dato at his pinnacle anchored the Malaysian judiciary with impeccable integrity in quintessential attributes. However, the independence of the Malaysian judiciary under the able leadership of Allahyarham Tun Dato underwent an experience like no other, often under fire and unchallenged by displeased adversaries. For many, the events of 1988 were an upheaval of the nation's judicial system. Rightly or wrongly, many disputed both the legality and morality of the related proceedings. Many felt that it was a time of crisis from which the nation never fully recovered. Crisis or otherwise, we cannot ignore and must duly acknowledge the courage and the contributions of the late Tun Saleh Abbas for his unwavering, fearless, and consistent commitment towards upholding justice and his defense towards the independence of the judiciary. His crusade was avant-garde and uncompromising, where he fought fearlessly for what he truly believed was right. In our tribute to Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas, we must unconditionally and under all circumstances continue to guard and preserve the values, ideals, and principles that he so adamantly fought for. It is said that although a life lived with integrity may lack the trappings of fame and fortune, it is always a paragon for others to follow. During his lecture for the Ahmad Ibrahim Memorial Lecture in 2008, entitled 50 Years of Constitutional Government in Malaysia, despite the tribulation and the storm that followed him, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas registered his belief in the letters of the law, but was quick to remind those who are entrusted with it in the following words: perhaps there is nothing wrong with the law itself, but those applying it should have strong belief in the spirit of justice and fair play. In one of his media interviews, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas provided an insight of what elements he felt were necessary for the judiciary to continue its duties as the nation's last bastion of the law. He was quoted to say, "The future of judiciary depends on the courage of judges, their abilities to write good judgments, and their willingness to write independent judgments, as these three aspects are essential in upholding the legal system in Malaysia." As a judge, Allahyarham Tun Saleh, many notable judicial decisions showcase his brilliant mind, outstanding intellectual analysis, and admirable wisdom. His unique ability to write with clarity and lucidly such complex legal problems through intelligible exposition of legal principles are of rarity and often spoken of with reverence. During his tenure as a judge, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas authored numerous landmark judgments and contributed to several others. His views and interpretation of wide-ranging areas of the laws that he wrote comprise the basis for the fundamental principles we legal practitioners adhere to until this day. Any attempt to summarize the entirety of Allahyarham Tun Saleh's legacy in such a short time would be a disservice thereto, and hence I shall endeavor to succinctly highlight only a few of them. Some of Allahyarham Tun Saleh's renowned judgments that constitute a major contribution to the Malaysian jurisprudence are displayed in the cases of Abdullah Zawawi versus Public Prosecutor versus Zainuddin, Public Prosecutor versus Rajapan, Lim Kit Siang against Datuk Seri Dr. Mahathir, Muhammad bin Daud and others against Government of Malaysia versus Lim Kit Siang, and Cik Omar bin Cik So versus Public Prosecutor. Even in his dissenting judgment, such as in the cases of Malaysian Bar against Government of Malaysia and Public Prosecutor against Datuk Yap Peng, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas likewise managed to equally display his intellectual legal analysis, reasoning in mastery of the law. In his judgment, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas has always emphasized and prioritized the fortification of public interests. He would have no qualms to rebuke public servants that are inclined to exercise their powers arbitrarily where he deems fit, particularly when the interest of the public is trampled on. This was demonstrated in the case of pemungut hasil tanah daerah Barat Daya Pulau Pinang against Ong Gek Ki, where in his judgment, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas reminded as follows: "What then is the convenient speed? In our view, it must be as soon as possible, or within a reasonable time, and not as late as possible. Obviously, what amounts to convenient speed must vary from case to case, and in our judgment, 7 years delay is certainly not a convenient speed, as it is so far outside the normal period of time that no reasonable authority could ever regard it as reasonable. That being the case, the court is entitled to strike down the impugned acquisition proceeding as illegal. The collector may well have plenty of work and other duties to perform within the available time at his disposal, but he must consider not only the interests of the state of which he is an official, but also that of the landowners whose land he is acquiring. He must therefore arrange his duties in such a way as not to neglect the interest altogether. Failure to do so, resulting in a diminution of their interest, in our view, amounts to an abuse of power which entitles the landowners concerned to an order of certiorari. The passage, in essence, demonstrates and symbolizes Allahyarham Tun Saleh's high regard for the principle of fairness and reasonableness, which she so justly demonstrated consistently during his time on the bench. Although his career in service of the law was highly demanding, Allahyarham Tun Saleh's affection in the Academia of Law could not be suppressed. Whilst in the judicial and legal service, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas took time to teach as a part-time lecturer, imparting his knowledge on constitutional law to the students at the History Department at the University of Malaya from 1964 to 1967. He was also an external examiner for the Faculty of Law at the University of Malaya and the National University of Singapore. For his many accomplishments and contribution, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas was conferred honors by both local and foreign universities, among those being a doctorate in letters by University Putrajaya, Malaysia, and University Malaya, a fellowship from the University of Harvard in 1971, a fellowship from the East-West Center, Honolulu, Hawaii, in 1971, and of course a fellowship from his alma mater, the University of Wales, in 1989. He was also appointed a visiting professor of the University of Monash and University of Melbourne, Australia, immediately after his retirement from the bench. I do sincerely believe that Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas epitomized all the required qualities of being, if not the best, one of the best judges this nation has ever seen. About 2,400 years ago, Socrates gave his iconic description of the essential qualities of a judge. He stated, 4 things belong to a judge: to hear courteously, to answer wisely, to consider soberly, and to decide impartially. It is without a doubt in my mind that Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas demonstrated these qualities in the discharge of his judicial duties. His demeanor was placid, his tone was firm, his dealings were respectful, his management was efficient, and above all, he was impartial and independent. His dedication to work was only one of many attributes of Allahyarham Tun Saleh's outstanding personality, as he was a man who was widely respected for his legal wisdom, scholarly bent of mind, and his affable and humble persona. His service and commitment to the law was commendable and wholeheartedly sometimes, maybe even at the expense of his own family and children. Though the many travails endured by Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas during his lifetime, he reflected and personified a man's innate ability to elevate his own self through relentless endeavor and ceaseless will, exemplifying the adage that the best place to find a helping hand is at the end of your own arm. Allow me to quote the Quranic letters in Surah Al-Kahfi, verse 30, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy reminded us all that, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Innal ladhina amanu wa amilu salihati inna la nudhi'u ajra man ahsana amala. Indeed, those who believe and done righteous deeds, indeed, we will not allow to be lost the reward of any who did well in deeds. With the passing of this legal luminary, our legal fraternity has lost a stellar jurist who has not only contributed immensely to the Malaysian jurisprudence, but also to greatly furthering the collective probity and propriety of our society. May the mercy and blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be always upon him. We pray that the Almighty too shall give strength to the family members to bear such irreparable loss with fortitude. Allow me to conclude by humbly praying in the hallowed tradition of the Bar that this reference held in honor of Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Haji Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas be entered into and be preserved in the court archive. and that the copy of the same be extended to the family of Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Haji Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas. Thank you. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Peguam Negara. Yang amat berbahagia Tun Raul Sharif, mantan Ketua Hakim Negara, merangkap Ahli Suruhanjaya Pelantikan Kehakiman. Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Rohana binti Yusof, Presiden Mahkamah Rayuan. Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Datuk Sri Azhar bin Muhammad, Hakim Besar Melaya. Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Datuk Abang Iskandar bin Abang Hashim, Hakim Besar Sabah dan Sarawak. Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Idrus Harun, Peguam Negara Malaysia. Yang berhormat Datuk Wira Mas Ermiati binti Samsudin, Timbalan Menteri di Jabatan Perdana Menteri, Parlimen dan Undang-Undang. Yang Arif, Hakim Mahkamah Persekutuan dan Hakim Mahkamah Rayuan. Yang berusaha Puan Hasbi binti Hassan, Ketua Pendaftar Mahkamah Persekutuan Malaysia. Yang berusaha Puan Karen Chia Yilin, yang di-Pertua Majlis Peguam Malaysia yang hadir bersama-sama Wakil Majlis Peguam Malaysia dan pengurusi serta Wakil Peguam dari Persatuan Peguam Negeri Selangor. Ahli-ahli keluarga Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas, Div-Div kehormat, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dihormati sekalian. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. I rise today with honor and privilege to deliver my recitation in the memory of a towering jurist in Malaysian legal history, Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh Abbas. It is indeed a humbling experience for me to deliver this recitation in fondness of Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas. This morning is also very meaningful with the presence of Allahyarham's family, 39 of them altogether, to grace these special events in memory of Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas. I respectfully endorse and share a similar admiration for Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas as eloquently expressed by the Attorney General Tan Sri Idrus Harun and the President of the Malaysian Bar, Madam Karen Chia Yilin. Allow me to add my reverence to the recitation. As we gather today to pay tribute to the memory of Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas, I would first like to express my deep sorrow for his passing on the 16th of January 2021 at the age of 91 due to COVID-19 complications. On behalf of the Malaysian judiciary, allow me to express our heartfelt condolences to the family of Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas. Allahyarham had an illustrious and glorious career, and he brought the Malaysian judiciary to an exalted status. For his eminence and judicial legacy, his demise reverberates across the nation, as his passing is not only a great loss to the judiciary, but the nation. Allahyarham Tun Salleh Abbas has set many precedents that are still felt to this day. During Allahyarham's tenure as the Lord President, the Malaysian judiciary was hailed as a model for other countries in terms of independence and credibility. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, undoubtedly Allahyarham's immeasurable contribution to the developments of the law and the Malaysian legal jurisprudence was grounded by his innate sense of fairness and justice, which served him well as a judge and a Lord President. As Tengku Sofiah Jiwa beautifully puts it, and I quote, "As I mourn the loss of Tun Salleh, I am nevertheless grateful to have had the chance to work with someone who stood up for an institution that protects the fundamental right of every citizen to seek justice when it is under attack, who persevered to uphold justice through trials and tribulations against his own interest, and having lost that battle, came back standing against the humiliation he had suffered and setting aside his pride to be in service of the law. I can only hope that his tale of moral courage will inspire others in the Commonwealth of nations and beyond to follow in his noble footsteps." Close quote. Allahyarham's unwavering respect for the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary is evident from his judgments. The legal principles and canons propounded by Allahyarham still resonate to the present day. This may be noted in, among others, Muhammad bin Daud, against Government of Malaysia, Government of Malaysia against Lim Kit Siang, Cik Omar bin Cik Soh against Public Prosecutor, Public Prosecutor against Rajapan, Public Prosecutor against Zainuddin and another, Malaysian Bar and another against Government of Malaysia, and Public Prosecutor against Datuk Yap Ping. Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas valiantly defended the role of the judiciary. He reminded that judges ought to observe and respect the concept of separation of powers, for judges should not encroach into the domain of the executive or the legislative branches of the government. That said, he acknowledged that it is also the role of the judiciary to invalidate any acts of the executive or the legislative using prerogative writs or declarations should they transgress their powers beyond the limits granted to them by the Federal Constitution. In Lim Kit Siang against Datuk Sri Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, he stated thus, and I quote, "The courts have a constitutional function to perform and they are the guardian of the Constitution within the terms and structure of the Constitution itself. They not only have the power of construction and interpretation of legislation, but also the power of judicial review, a concept that pumps through the arteries of every constitutional adjudication and which does not imply the superiority of judges over legislators, but of the Constitution over both. The courts are the final arbiter between the individual and the state and between individuals inter se, and in performing their constitutional role, they must of necessity and strictly in accordance with the Constitution and the law be the ultimate bulwark against unconstitutional legislation or excesses in administrative action. If that role of the judiciary is appreciated, then it will be seen that the courts have a duty to perform in accordance with the oath taken by judges to uphold the Constitution and act within the provisions of and in accordance with the law." Close quote. Indeed, his judgments are peppered with wisdom and prudence. We are eternally indebted to his sense of justice, which has left an indelible impression throughout the generations of legal fraternity. Ladies and gentlemen, the year 1988 will always be remembered as the darkest chapter in the history of the Malaysian judiciary. A judiciary, its independence vouchsafed by the Federal Constitution, was stunned by the removal of the Lord President, Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas. It infamously led to the upheaval of the nation's judicial system and a shattering blow to the judiciary and the Constitution. The 1988 episode should be taken as a lesson to judges that, despite attempts to undermine the independence of the judiciary, judges must, in all circumstances, be faithful to the Federal Constitution and be resolute in upholding the rule of law. At this juncture, I would like to quote the Honorable Justice Michael Kirby, Commissioner of the International Commission of Jurists and President of the Court of Appeal, as follows. "Recounting this story again cannot reverse the injustice done to independent judges of courage and conviction. It cannot unmake the history that has been written. It cannot restore confidence in institutions that have been damaged, but it can serve to remind judges and other lawyers of the need for courage in defending time-honored concepts. It can help to perpetuate the recollection of the integrity of people appointed to judicial office so that their example serves as an inspiration to successors. It can also help to bring home to the impatient, opinionated governments which attack judicial independence that there are people in every land concerned to uphold the principle and to scrutinize departures from it against established international standards." Close quote. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Allahyarham's love for the judiciary was apparent. 7 months before his passing, we invited Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas to the Palace of Justice for a high tea to commemorate him as the special feature in the Malaysian Judicial Yearbook. In one interview with Allahyarham Tun Saleh Abbas, he repeatedly said that it has always been his last wish and fervent hope to address the bench, or at the very least, to have a simple do to mark his departure as the Lord President. For the past few decades since his removal, he said there was no closure for him as he never got the chance to bid goodbye to the court staff, the judiciary, and the legal fraternity. The evening ended with a simple send-off ceremony for Allahyarham Tun Dato. Little did we know that that evening was our final parting with our last goodbye to Allahyarham Tun Dato. As we mourn the loss of Allahyarham Tun Dato, we are very blessed to have a Lord President who staunchly defended our federal constitution and championed the judiciary's independence to his very end. Allahyarham was indeed a great and courageous legal luminary. It is worth emphasizing that an independent judiciary that is free from any external influences is the lifeblood of constitutionalism in a democratic society. This is the foundation of judicial power and the central component of the doctrine of separation of powers. Therefore, we dedicate this reference to Allahyarham's honor. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. Indeed, we belong to Allah, and indeed, to Him we will return. As a mark of respect, may I invite all Muslims present to offer Al-Fatiha, and for non-Muslims to observe a minute silence. May Allahyarham be placed among those who are guided and rewarded with Jannah. Thank you. Saya meneruskan prosiding dengan menjemput Cik Nur Alisa binti Nur Razak, Wakil Ahli Keluarga Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas untuk memberikan ucapan penghargaan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang Amat Arif Tun Tengku Maimun binti Tuan Mat, Ketua Hakim Negara, Yang Amat Berbahagia Tun Raul Sharif, Mantan Ketua Hakim Negara merangkap Ahli Suruhanjaya Pelantikan Kehakiman, Yang Arif Tan Sri Rohana binti Yusof, Presiden Mahkamah Rayuan, Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Dato' Sri Azhar bin Muhammad, Hakim Besar Melaya, Yang Amat Arif Tan Sri Dato' Abang Iskandar bin Abang Hashim, Hakim Besar Sabah Sarawak, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Idrus Harun, Peguam Negara Malaysia, Yang Berhormat Datuk Wira Mas Ermiyati binti Samsudin, Timbalan Menteri di Jabatan Perdana Menteri, Bahagian Parlimen dan Undang-Undang, Yang Arif, Hakim Mahkamah Persekutuan dan Hakim Mahkamah Rayuan, Yang Bersuha Puan Hazbi binti Hassan, Ketua Pendaftar Mahkamah Persekutuan Malaysia, Yang Berusaha Puan Karen Shah Yilin, Yang di-Petua Badan Peguam Malaysia yang hadir bersama-sama Wakil Majlis Peguam Malaysia dan pengerusi serta Wakil Peguam dari Persatuan Peguam Negeri Selangor, Dev kehormat, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dihormati sekalian. Saya Nur Alisa binti Nur Razak, cucu kepada Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Haji Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas. Saya akan menyampaikan ucapan mewakili semua ahli keluarga Allahyarham. Saya memohon untuk menyampaikan ucapan saya dalam bahasa Inggeris. My family and I are honored and humbled that the judiciary has convened the special reference proceedings of the Federal Court in honor of my late grandfather, Tun Dato Dr. Haji Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas. We are deeply moved and touched by the eloquent and heartfelt speeches delivered by the President of the Malaysian Bar, the Attorney General, and the Honourable Chief Justice. It has been 34 years since my late grandfather was dismissed as the Lord President of the Supreme Court of Malaysia after serving the judiciary for almost 10 years. Prior to that, he had also served in the judicial and legal services, including as Solicitor General before his appointment to the Federal Court. My late grandfather came from humble beginnings. He was born on the 25th of August, 1929, in Kampung Raja, Besut in the state of Terengganu. His father, my late great-grandfather, was a seafaring man and would often travel between Besut and Songkhla in southern Thailand to import rice, salt, or other commodities to be sold in Besut. My late grandfather had 7 siblings, including himself. His only surviving sister, Puan Haja Shamsia binti Abbas, is in attendance with us here today. My late grandfather's journey to school was a challenging one. He had to go through bushy paths and hills which he said sometimes raised his hair for the fear of ghosts. He even had to wade knee-deep water to reach his school. This showed his determination to attain education in spite of the ghosts. Before he completed his primary education, he was interviewed by a team of officers from the Education Office of Kuala Terengganu for the purposes of sending him to study at Malay College Kuala Kangsar, or as we all know, MCKK. Even though he was selected, he decided to stay in Terengganu as there were no direct roads to Kuala Kangsar from Terengganu back then. His desire for further education was so strong because he realized that without education, his life would be mired in poverty and ignorance. In 1940, with the assistance of his father, he decided to study at Sultan Sulaiman English School in Kuala Terengganu. He was forced to suspend school due to the Japanese invasion in 1942 and returned to Besut on foot with a number of people. That journey alone took 4 days. Whilst in Besut, he did not remain idle. He studied Arabic. And after the war was over, he resumed his studies at the English school. In 1948, he sat for the Cambridge School Certificate Examinations, which was the first time that a Terengganu school ever held this examination. He obtained grade 1 to the delight of his teachers and the superintendent of education at that time. In 1950, the late Sultan Ismail Nasaruddin Shah, the grandfather of the present Sultan Terengganu, established a scholarship for deserving students to study in the United Kingdom. Not known to many, my late grandfather was one of the first recipients who was offered the scholarship for accountancy or public administration. He gratefully accepted the scholarship. Arriving in England, he was brought to see an officer in the colonial office. Somehow or other, he decided to read law as he had previously studied Latin and obtained distinction for his Cambridge examinations. And the rest, as they say, is history. As a student, he was an admirer of Lord Denning, who wrote clear judgments in short sentences and was much against technicalities. After my grandfather's call to the bar, he personally met Lord Denning to get his signature to be enrolled to the English courts. Upon his return to Malaya, he joined the judicial and legal service and served for many years there, and eventually became the Solicitor General from 1969 to 1979. As he was reaching the age of 50, he was counting the days to retirement to join private practice, but the late Tun Sufyan had other plans, appointing him straight to the Federal Court in 1979 and was eventually promoted as Chief Justice in 1982. When the late Lord President Raja Azlan Shah, as His Majesty then was, ascended to the throne in 1984, he recommended my late grandfather to succeed him as the Lord President. And so he was appointed and served as a Lord President until his dismissal in 1988. The struggles my grandfather experienced post-1988 was neither reported nor recorded. He rarely spoke about it, but only God knows the sacrifices and struggles he faced. He sought solace back in Terengganu with the guidance from God, and praise be to God, he was truly a man full of sabr. As a young boy, he never dreamt of being someone of position, let alone Lord President of Malaysia. He thought he would be contented living a life of a kampung man growing paddy and tapping rubber. But Allah had other plans for him, and through education and hard work, he joined the civil service and became the highest judge of the land. Even during his last years, he would appear before the courts to aid those who were wronged pro bono. As his clientele were mostly humble folks that included fishermen or farmers, who would accept their produce in return for the legal advice he provided. That was the kind of man he was, generous and humble, expecting nothing in return. Although he may appear as a man of a few words, he was a loving grandfather, always reminding and teaching all 6 children and 26 grandchildren about Islam and the importance of seeking knowledge. I had asked several of my cousins how they would describe our late grandfather in a few words. The common ones are studious. We would always find him reading the day's paper or a book, a workaholic until he was not able to, and a man of nature. We would always find him in his pagoda t-shirt and kain plakat tending to his orchard. My late grandfather's dedication and devotion to serve his country never wavered through times of change and progress, and through times of sadness and loss. He was a fearless man. Soon after his dismissal, he was invited to deliver the John Foster Galloway Memorial Lecture at University College London on the 4th of November, 1988. Permit me to share an excerpt of his speech. I quote, "In spite of what has happened to me and the Malaysian judiciary, I am happy to note that the affairs surrounding my removal has so strengthened the nation that Malaysians, irrespective of race and religion, have become united and jointly concerned over this episode. This is surely an indication that they have understood and appreciated the principle of independent judiciary, and this is a great asset on which to rebuild a shattered judiciary from its present ruins. To their simple minds, the message can simply be stated in these words: no judge, no law, no protection, and everyone for himself," unquote. I'm confident that the Malaysian judiciary had rebuilt itself from the dark days of '88 and will reach even greater heights under the stewardship of the Chief Justice and the Honourable Judges. On behalf of the entire family of Tun Saleh Abbas, I thank our Chief Justice, Yang Amat Arif Tun Tengku Maimun binti Tuan Mat, once again for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of my family at this reference proceedings in memory of our beloved brother, father, and grandfather. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih kepada Cik Nur Alisa binti Nur Razak. Saya mengakhiri prosiding ini dengan memerintahkan agar rekod prosiding disimpan di dalam arsip Mahkamah dan sesalinan rekod diserahkan kepada keluarga Allahyarham Tun Dato Dr. Mohamed Salleh bin Abbas. Mahkamah ditangguhkan.